When my dad was over in the Pacific trying to shoot down the kamikaze planes at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, he made a promise to himself to take his family west when he ever got home. So in 1946, my dad, mom, grandmother, and my sister and I loaded up our station wagon and drove from Florida to Wyoming in 6.5 long days. This is our car. Tag along. This is my sister and I in front of a partially ice-covered sublet lake at Togati Pass, just east of the Grand Teton National Park. This is snow on Togati Pass. Having come from Florida, snow was such an amazing sight to see. This is the first view of the Grand Teton Mountains from Togati Pass. Here are some beautiful clouds and hayfields on the way to the Whitegrass Ranch. We get to Moose, Wyoming, and here's the chuck wagon at Moose, where you could buy a good meal. Also in Moose was Bob Carmichael's tackle shop. Bob was quite a character and a great fisherman with many wild stories.
This was our first view of the Grand Teton with Lupin in the foreground. We're on the road to Whitegrass, passing by these service berries called Saskatoon. We saw many things on our way to the ranch. Here are the Tetons on the Moose-Wilson Road to Whitegrass with 2 moose in the sagebrush. This is Mountain Sunflower on the road to Whitegrass. In the foreground of this pond, you can see a tiny baby moose and the mother just beyond. And this is just part of the 6-mile road from the highway to Whitegrass. And here we are at the entrance gate to the ranch.
And there's the main cabin with snow still on the mountains. This is another view of the main cabin where everyone congregated. Here is my sister and me in front of our little cabin our first years. We had 2 rooms. My parents slept in one room and my sister and I slept in the other. There was no electricity or running water, but we were very happy there. In later years, we moved to this cabin, which used to be the caretaker's cabin. It was winterized and quite luxurious compared to our first cabin. Here's my dad sitting on the front porch overlooking the hayfield. This is the interior. It was very comfortable. My mom always had fresh flowers that she picked out in the fields. We stayed in that cabin for many years until it was burnt down by some skiers who didn't know how to open the flue. This was our outhouse, which was absolutely clean, if not sweet-smelling at all times. This is a storm cloud coming in that produced a rainbow. We saw it in the 1940s, but you might see the same view tomorrow.
What made Whitegrass so wonderful were the unique people who found their way to the ranch. This included the owners, wranglers, cabin girls, and cooks, as well as many guests with varying backgrounds. All gave so much of themselves to the ranch to make it so special. Here are some of those people. Rachel Traherne was and is one of a kind. She was able to manage any situation that might arise with aplomb and goodwill. She worked all the time and ran everything smoothly, more or less. It's thanks to her that we are all here today at this Whitegrass reunion in 2014. This is George Clover, but everyone called him Big George. He was the head wrangler for many years. George was a deep thinker and my dearest friend. Here is Frank Gailey, the owner of the ranch. Frank was very good-looking with lots of charm. And here is Frank's lovely wife, Inga. Kurt Windsor was a guest from Philadelphia. Clay Seaton really lived at the next ranch down, but would come up and help out. Here's some of the gang, including Tony Fox, Elise Morris Clover, and Big George. This is Mac, James Michael McTiernan, an Irishman who was one of my first big heartthrobs. Here's Bob Holly, a wrangler at the ranch. After one summer was over, he went off to fight in Korea. Here's a sweet guy we all loved, Fran Strawbridge, a wrangler from Philadelphia. This is my dad, Larry Messler. Here's my mom, Alice, who loved flowers and was the photographer of virtually all of these pictures.
This is Bob Lewis, who also worked at the ranch. In this one, you can see Bob was an avid fisherman with all the lures on his hat. Jay Matthews was a young boy whose family came as guests at about the same year as we did. They were from Philadelphia. And here's Jay's mother, Suki Matthews. Here's another one of Rachel and her friend, Fricky. This little girl is Susie Malore, who was the daughter of Frank's business partner. Here's my sister, Carol Messler, in 1946, not quite 8 years old. Here's Carol 7 years later. Last but not least, here I am with Strawberry, the first horse I broke to ride.
The center of the ranch revolved around the barn. Every dude was given a horse for their stay. The horses were let out at night to go find food. There were no fences, so the next morning wranglers left the barn at 5 a.m. to try to find the 80 to 90 horses, bring them back, and saddle them up for the morning ride. Here are the horses being driven back to the corral in the morning. Now here they are in the corral where they will be saddled up for the guests. Here's Lizzie Quayle, ready to take her horse on a morning ride. Here are some other guests getting their horses to go for a ride. Here's my father on Patches and my sister Carol on Little Eva. There's old Custer with my mother. There I am on Sleepy in 1946. After a fun day of riding, a few horses were kept in the corrals for the wranglers to use the next morning. The main herd would be let out to find food and water. Another day ending.
On Sundays, anyone who wanted could ride their horse to the Chapel of Transfiguration at Moose, a 6-mile ride each way. This is the church window which makes up the altar. Then everybody started mounting up to ride home. Whitegrass had few neighbors, but they were good ones. The Inglis family lived in a teepee just a short walk through the woods from the ranch. They had 2 older kids who worked somewhere, and 1 young daughter who would have loved to be living at the ranch. Here are Fred and Helen entertaining one of my mom's friends. The other neighbor owned the trail ranch and only entertained the adults. But I had to ride through their moose ponds almost every day on my wrangling route and saw lots of moose over the years. One of my favorite activities in the early years was haying. Here I am driving a team to cut hay. When I was a little older, I was allowed to drive a team to rake the hay before it was gathered, and later I used a team to move the hay. After the hay was cut and gathered by the horse teams, the hay was put on a rack at the bottom of the stacker. A team would pull the hay to the top, and it would dump over into the hay below. You can see the guys ready to smooth the hay into a well-shaped stack. Here's a picture of the hay with a storm approaching. There was always something going on in those early days when the ranch was more into farming and raising food for the guests.
Here's one of the teams, Snip and Bess, with kids aboard to help deliver wood to the guest cabins for their wood stoves. Calves being weaned. Whitegrass had cows to supply the milk and cream for the guests in the early days. This is a pig pen with a bear inside the pen. Here's a better view of the bear. Whitegrass also had chickens which were used for Sunday dinners. Kids and a few adults would pluck them for the cook. Our cabin attracted many porcupines because of the salt put on the roof when the caretakers spent the winter on the ranch. The porcupines would scratch on the roof so much that my dad couldn't sleep, and he ended up shooting some. It gave me the opportunity to practice skinning and learning some anatomy, which helped me when I butchered deer back in Connecticut. Here are some of the other kids, including my sister, who were more interested in the mule than cutting up porcupines. Another interesting activity was watching Big George shoeing a horse. He was willing to teach us if we were truly willing to work. He also taught me how to break a horse to ride. Various animals visited the ranch. Here's my sister with a fawn. And here she is again with a young bear. Speaking of bears, one time Nicky Fox lassoed a young bear cub and dragged it back to the ranch. Frank was livid at Nick's stupidity, but fortunately no one was hurt, and the cub was released to go back to its mama, who had followed the cub to the ranch.
One of the most popular rides was to the Phelps Lake Overlook. This time there was fresh snow on the other side of the lake. On the way there were many wildflowers: mountain ash, harebells, Indian paintbrush, wild columbine, and finally the overlook. John Rockefeller had his ranch at the other end of the lake, and we sometimes passed each other riding up Death Canyon. Some of the more adventuresome guests would want to go on a pack trip for several days or longer. Several horses were packed with food, clothing, sleeping bags, tents, extra horseshoes, matches, etc. Being Whitegrass, sometimes things like the tents were forgotten, but people learned to make do. One of the favorite trips was up to Marion Lake, named after Marion Hammond, whose husband was one of the original owners of Whitegrass. This is the head wall of Death Canyon on the Marion Lake trip. Here you can just see the Grand Teton from the south. Here's a closer view. There's Marion Lake. Here is a pack trip guest looking down at Marion Lake. And there is the campsite. Here's some alpine paintbrush and columbine and flax. Evening at Marion Lake, Sheep Mountain in the distance.
More rugged pack trips were to Granite and Garnet Canyons. Packing the pack horses was generally a two-man job. This is on the trail to Granite Canyon. You can see a little snow up higher, even though it's only August. There were lovely meadows with wildflowers, but you can see the more rugged terrain above. Here is a rest stop by a stream. Finally, this is getting toward the top of Granite Canyon and deciding to make camp. We set up our campsite in the tents. Garnet Canyon was the really rugged one. Looking up, you can see it was a difficult climb. Fortunately, there were beautiful streams to stop by on the way. Eventually, we would get above the tree line. It was definitely rugged country and not easy for the horses. Rugged but beautiful, and here you can see looking back down into Jackson Hole. Some people felt it was safer to walk up there. This is a tree that didn't make it. Really rugged country. This is Spalding Falls in Garnet Canyon. There was lots of snow there in July 1951. This picture is coming home near the end of the pack trip. A storm was moving in, and you can see the rain down near Wilson.
Fishing was another activity enjoyed especially by my parents. Some of the guests wanted to go fishing, and my dad would sometimes act as a guide. Fly fishing in a stream was their preference. Here's my mom with a 4-pound rainbow trout. Even though stream fishing was a favorite, sometimes they went lake fishing for the beginners. This is Taggart Lake. These are my parents having a good day. Many a time they would bring back dinner for all the guests at the ranch. One more beautiful evening.
The highlight of the summer was the Dude Rodeo. Once a year, a rodeo for the guests of the Dude ranches was held in Jackson at the rodeo grounds. On the day before the event, the horses were driven the 20 miles into town. There was a festive parade in the morning with floats and costumes. That was the mayor of the town leading the parade. Note that the streets weren't paved then. Here comes the Whitegrass group with Frank and Inga carrying the banner. That's me as an Arab. A kidnapping. This is one of the floats by our rival, Triangle X. Typical Western justice. I like this stagecoach. Here's some of the Whitegrass costumes. This is my sister Carol. That's Nick Fox, Frank's nephew. That's my sister another year. And this was the smallest child on the largest horse in the parade. This is an old-timer, my dad. And here was the tiniest horse with the largest pack. Inside the arena were roping and bucking contests. Here's some calf roping. There's Frank Gailey trying to get a calf. Behind all those horses and such is the judges' stand. Here's one of the bareback bronc riders doing very well. There's another one. This is me. I'm not on a bareback bronc, I'm on a bareback mule. Needless to say, I ended up on the ground. This is me the next year on a bareback bucking mule, and I managed to win first place that year. There were lots of dude races. Here is my little sister in 1948. There she is, winning the 16 years and younger race some years later. Good for her. What a sister. One of the more difficult races was the slow race. Your horse had to be moving all the time, and the one that came in last was the winner. My favorite race was the novelty race, where you walked your horse the first quarter of a mile, trotted the second quarter of a mile, and ran like hell the third quarter of a mile. I also won the Dudeen race 3 years in a row, and this is one of them. This was another one. And here I was at the winner's circle of the third one. George was very proud of me, and that was the best part. This is my family the year Whitegrass won first place in the overall dude rodeo. We beat all the other ranches in the valley, and so a very happy ending.